And we bought a camper van, so that's 6 square meters. And when you live with 5 people and it's successful, you really do know you love each other. But it took me 3 years to get completely over it. And then, I was no longer a team lead. I was no longer in charge of that specific semester. Um,
Hello and welcome. My name is Alex, and today I'm with Michel Portier from Netherlands, the former developer, teacher at university, cybersecurity trainer, who took a year off the grid to reconnect with the family. And yeah,
That's absolutely right. I had a few in between career gigs as well, but that's mainly mostly correct. Yeah,
awesome. Thank you for joining in. Really appreciate that.
it's a pleasure. I'm really happy to be here and see you again.
Yeah. Uh, just a side note, we also former colleagues with Michelle, so seeing each other is also a nice thing.
Yeah, what's that? More 1.5 year or something? Maybe two even. I
Yeah,
don't know. Yeah,
kind of like that. Cool.
we
So
kept in touch, so that's cool. But
sure.
you're in Latvia, I'm in the Netherlands, so you know you.
Yeah,
You don't take a bike and go all the way to Latvia, and it's way too
yeah.
cold in Latvia.
Unfortunately, there is no bike lane from Netherlands to Latvia.
Nope.
A missed opportunity. We should call the Dutch government and say, like, there are places without the bike lanes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we should call some more governments because I think there are some countries in between you have to travel
Oh
through.
yeah, true, true. Well, that happens.
Yep.
Anyway, cool.
Yes.
Thank you for joining in. Let's talk about your life path. Why you decided to tie your life with high tech? What dragged you in? Have you watched some cool movie with, I don't know, Sylvester Stallone or maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you thought like, high tech is for me, or it was something else?
Maybe war games from the 80s. You know that movie? It's about a couple of hackers that go into the machine. It's really an 80s movie, so right now it doesn't make any sense, but back then it was really cool. But that's not how we got into tech. But you mentioned the movie, and I had to think of that. That's actually quite a good hook. How tech is seen back then and how it is now. Um, but I think there are two things, like my upbringing and how I got into tech. But another thing is also quite interesting because I am at the verge of what they call Generation X and Millennials. And Xenial is someone it's only like 4 years, like from 78 to 82. And you have all these aspects of Generation X, which really grew up without technology, basically. But I also relate a lot to millennials who grew up with technology and the internet, basically. I have both. So I grew up with face-to-face contact, analog, playing outside with my bike and all that, unsupervised. You know the drill that nobody has anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because even I think it depends because I'm from Latvia, so obviously like a post-Soviet country, and probably we got into that thing a little bit later. So what you describe is pretty much my childhood,
Ah,
but
right.
we are a good 5 to 10 years apart.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
You're on the good
it's
side.
so
So yeah, let me continue with that, because millennials, they are called digital natives because they know how to operate their tech, basically. And you find anyone before the 80s always finding a bit of trouble with that, because I really went to pen and pencil even at work still. So for them it changed during their lives. For millennials it didn't really change, and I'm like at the centerpiece of that. And I do feel, even though I'm 44 years old, I feel more millennial than Generation X. And this is because I have elder brothers, and they introduced computers into my home when I was very young. And this is how it all got started. So basically, when I was 4 years old, an MSX was introduced by my elder brother into the household. And of course, it was very interesting. You hook it up to a television set, and you can basically play games. But after a couple of years, when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, I was interested in how this actually works. So we had read a book with that. It was called the MSX Red Book, and it contained some basic commands, also a bit about the architecture. But I couldn't speak English back then, so I asked my brother, who was studying electric engineering and computers technology at the same time, to explain me a little bit. And from there, I started reading book, and I started to teach myself how to program when I was about, I'm not completely sure, but it has to be somewhere between 10 and 12 years, I think. But it's so long ago, I don't recall it correctly. And then I started programming my first computer games in BASIC. So that's where it started. And then I was in high school in the 90s. And I had this old school paper. I was a paper boy, paper deliverer. So I saved up for a personal computer, a PC, and I actually bought my first PC 95, 96, 97. It's a little bit fuzzy, but around that time it had a CD-ROM player, so maybe a good listener can historically locate it when that was. It had Windows 95, but I didn't like it, so I remember I installed DOS because I felt like I had more control back then. Because 95 ate so many resources. And from there, I continued my path. I started making electronic music on my computer, did some more programming, joined a small, well, I wouldn't call it was a hackers club, but they made some demos, they did some music, they did some 0 days, they did some games. It was called the Force 927. Maybe you can look it up in the archives. And from there everything opened up. And but the real change was actually a little bit before that, when we got internet. I think that was in '97 or something. And I used to play Command and Conquer. Maybe you've heard of it, or you're too young for that.
Of course, of course, of course.
So, and there was this program. It was on the CD-ROM, and it was called WChat, or Westwood Chat. And it was basically a IRC client. And I opened it up, and then within 15 minutes, I was chatting with someone from Singapore, and I was really completely amazed, because I'm not from a rich family, so I haven't been out of town much. And then I was just chatting with someone who was in Singapore. I was like, I remember I did this in the morning just before school, and then I went to school, and I said to my friends, I've been chatting to someone from Singapore. Oh man, you nerd. Whatever. So it was all nerdy back then. People didn't understand it. It was really, really weird. But I always found the internet and the ease of communication, that was my main selling point, to be honest. So this is basically how I got introduced in tech. And I'll come back on this later, I decided, what shall I study, what do I do after high school. Actually, I wanted to become a doctor, but my mom said, well, you're behind this computer all the time, so you should study computer science like your brother. He's happy with that. And I was kind of like, I'm really interested in it. But even when I was 17, 18, I thought, will I be happy sitting behind the desk all day? I already had that. But then my mom, of all people, said, well, you're not that good with people, so go study computer science. So so I did. And yeah, do I regret it? No, not really. But yes, a bit, because it does steer your career uh, in a way. And I found out later that I'm actually good with people. So, but I was a bit nerdy in my high school period, so people had the wrong impression about me, I think.
So you actually brought a very interesting topic, the IRC,
Yeah,
and the IRC client. I don't know how about in like Netherlands, but here in Latvia, everybody was using a non-standard IRC client made by, and it had some shortcuts to offend someone. So you point to that person and you do a shortcut and it writes some offensive message, or you can with a shortcut you can drop a joke, or it had some built-in channels. When you start it, it has some, a custom theme, a custom sound, and all that thing.
yeah, yeah. I had that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been on IRC for ages, and I've met some interesting people from there. But I mainly used it at the start to download Dragon Ball Z.
But remember back in like that, I mean, obviously, through this podcast we are going to sound a little bit of an gramps. Man,
Yeah,
back in all days.
yeah.
uh,
Sorry about that.
well, what you can do about it. But if we are going to look at the way people were getting familiar with each other, it was just a random nickname. And sometimes you can just even pick a random nickname, because some channels were allowing you to register a certain nick,
Yeah,
and some, yeah, just could join as, John Doe, and that's it. And that's the only thing that folks knew. It was so unpersonified than it is right now. And it was crazy because you can just, swap nicknames every day or every hour. And yeah, but we all were connecting our computers directly to the network. There was no
yes,
routers.
yes.
So
But back then it was a wild west. I mean, I was full on RC in the end of the 90s, at the end of the 90s. And I started living at the campus at the uni, and I had like 100 megabit two-way full duplex internet connection. And but I was also part of a student club, which was completely offline back then. So you just go to this place, drink beers. People did have cell phones, but they had an email address through uni, sometimes a Hotmail address, but Gmail didn't even exist back then. So to meet people, you go to a bar, you go to a place, and you start talking to people. And I sometimes I felt like I had two lives. So I went to a party because I was obviously a student. I came home at my little room at the campus. Um, half a bit. No, maybe I shouldn't say this on camera. Slightly, maybe one beer, maybe two, and
you mean 2 dozen beers? Am I correct with my multiplier?
well, I leave that interpretation to you. So I would come home maybe 1 o'clock or something. Then I would open my computer, not open it. It was a fixed computer. I'm really thinking laptops right now, but back then it was fixed, and I kept it running all the time. So I was on RSC 24/7. I would say hi, and then the world would be there. But it was different friends. Like it was all very nerdy. Now it's really normal to mix your real life with your online life, because if with all the social media, your anonymity, it's gone. And I was like, I don't want to be that nerdy, so I was studying computer science, and I explicitly joined like this debate clubs, went to bars, clubs, made friends at the student union, all that, because I didn't want to be one of those nerdy guys. I wanted to develop my social skills as well. And then I had fun online, and I had some meetings with the guys I met from IRC as well, as early as the 90s. But people didn't understand it. It was one of my best friends. I actually met him on IRC. He's now a professor at one of the best universities in mathematics. So it's yeah, it was very nice to have those things separate, and I could never get used to, and I still don't like it. The fact that these two things are interconnected right now. I like to keep those things separate. I still like to go out and meet people face to face, and I think this has changed, well, somewhat.
It was a little bit of a nerdy society, right? And then now it became more like an extension of your life.
I just don't like the social media aspect of it. Like, I'm still, I still like it most when I see people face to face. That's my default to say, and I think that kind of switched for especially for the younger generation. But I think many who did not grow up like this also made this switch.
Think we can change it?
That's a tough question. Um, I think in some ways there's this evil in technology where they try to make it so addictive that it's very difficult for people to make different decisions. But yeah, I would like to change it. You know, back then I had fun being on ISC, being riding this technology wave, and at some point it flipped around, and we technology is riding us in a sense. And I think it is very difficult to change that unless maybe we are starting to see the real consequences. And I think it's beginning to, you know, this book from Jonathan Haidt. You
Yeah,
know the book
I know the
about
book.
how smartphones and social media is influencing our young people, our children, and that they don't recognize emotions in others anymore because they only know emojis and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, maybe in 10 years from now, we will say, like, well, we banned drinking from the schools, we banned smoking from the schools, no drugs under 18, whatever. How on earth could we have given them the internet and smartphones when they were just 12 years old? You know, I hope for young people we may start protecting them in a good way. But then, yeah, what keeps you from being addicted when you're 18 and you cannot do it all? So it's a tough one, to be honest.
That there are some governments that are trying to pass the law of banning the smartphones at school to a certain degree. So at some point you can bring it, but before the age of 16, I think in some, I, I don't recall which country it is, but they kind of proposed the age of 16 would be the bare minimum age when they can start using the smartphones anywhere near the school. I think it's right, but to my to my point that it's all starts with parents, and to my knowledge, only like a handful percent of parents actually using parental controls. But the other thing is that like for example I do, I'm quite strict on that, so we have all the parental controls set up. Parents need to invest more time in reading some material and actually knowing what their minors are doing there. What do you think about it? Should it be enforced more of like a law and governments and like schools, or should kind of it start with parents and then being passed to the regulatory environment?
All right, it's interesting that you asked this question. I'm quite ambivalent, that word, about it. Yes, I think it all starts with the parents. In the Netherlands and also in France, they passed a law that you can no longer take your phone to school anymore. Not in the classrooms, but in the Netherlands, they still use it during lunch breaks and all that at some schools. I'm sending my daughter to a high school where they also prohibit smartphones during lunch break, so they actually start talking to each other. I've been at the high school a couple of years back, and it would be like 500 kids there, and you could hear pin drop because it was so silent because everyone was communicating through their phones. So I think you should, by law, especially in schools, give children the right to grow up normally, face to face. So there, I see some part for our governments. But for instance, in Australia, they are now banning social media for people under 16. And from a parent's point of view, or an educational point of view, or grow up point of view, I kind of agree on that. But the thing is, and this is dangerous, the way they are going to enforce this policy, I think we are worse off when this happens, because basically for everything you do online that has an age restriction, you have to identify. So it's going to be the end of being anonymous on the internet. And from a parent's perspective, I understand it, but if you take a broader perspective, I find it very scary because so much control is given to our governments. And it's always like government saying, "Hey, you can trust us, but we don't trust you." I think that's how what this technology in the wrong hands is doing. And I can say in some ways it's in the wrong hands. It's also true for this chat control. Maybe you've heard of it, where all of these texts that you're going to send are being scanned for child sexual abuse materials and all that. So you scan everyone to find something. I mean, it's way out of control. You know that I think that's a very scary development, to be honest. So maybe we should say that social media is illegal under 16, but the way to enforce it should maybe not be technological. It should be like your kid is trying to do social media, and your parent or your teacher or someone outside says, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you on social media? You're not 16 yet. What are you doing?" Like a normal social control, like we've been doing for thousands of years. And it's kind of like this option is no longer in anyone's head, that we can like say uh, we don't allow it under 16 anymore, but we're not going to make this a technocracy and enforcing it by putting more restraints and control on our digital identities or life. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Would you think it can go firstly from being um, just a law and really it kind of leans into almost the ground, but then like a spring it pushes back and is going to kind of stop somewhere in the middle? Or you're more thinking that it may be just it goes that way and there is almost no way it can push back?
I think it's very important in life. There should be also to governments, also with your own children. There should be a little bit of a cat and mouse game. You know me. You know what I mean? And if you have like 100% control, there's also 100% distrust. We should also trust our children not to drink under 18, or be able to make their mistakes and grow out of it, you know? And the same might go for social media and all these things. No, it's not okay, but if you do it, it's not like you're dying. But what happens is this: look at what's happening in the UK. I'm not sure if you're following that. People get arrested for putting their opinions to social media that they consider unwanted at the moment. Not sure if you're following that, especially in the UK. So people are going to be scared, and this kind of controls. I think it's bad for people, and there will be pushback. But my biggest worry is that once all these control systems are in place, you will not be able to push back. So in normal circumstances, you would have like this spring going on, but it's just too heavy. The weight is too heavy, and then when you find you are in some sort of digital prison, you're too late. That's my biggest worry, because then we can no longer talk about this on a podcast, because you cannot publish it because AI will scan it for words that it doesn't seem appropriate, and then it will not be published. So you publish it on some kind of obscure internet server that nobody knows and no one will listen to it. So this is my bigger concern, and we should be very careful about implementing digital restrictions. Even if we think in general this digital technology is bad for us or our children, we should find other ways of not doing it. I mean, we do it in all real life stuff, but why is everything so digital right now? That's the question I would like to pose here. Yeah, that's interesting. So I taught myself programming even before uni. And then at the uni, it was all very theoretical. So I think 40% of my college time was mathematics on a high level. So, and then the dot-com boom bust. So I graduated in 2004 after 6 years. It took me a year longer than I was supposed to. And then there was no work, there were no jobs. It's the same as now in the US, but there were no jobs. So I had some classmates who went to write a thesis at like these big companies, and they were sent home because all departments were being sent home, so they could start all over again. So I had to do my master thesis at the uni. That's why it took so long, because I always felt like I could put more work in the next day, and then I would sleep and then do it the next day, and I would procrastinate for a year basically, and then I finally got it done. I actually got a good grade, but they downgraded it a bit because they felt like I could have done this in 5 months, which is true. I actually did it in 5 months, but then part time, I think. So I started working at a company who did think the internet was not just a bust, if you know what I mean. So what they did, it was a business-to-business company. They took on this project for the financial market, mostly insurers and banks. So we did some audits on the first internet banking website for one of the bigger banks in the Netherlands, and I wrote a lot of software for insurance in Java. So they could, back then everybody was still filling out paper forms. So we basically canceled the paper forms so they could fire all their administrative people.
The AI of that time.
Exactly, exactly. So they invested a lot in that. So when I started at the company, I was the 20th person. I think there are a couple of hundred right now, even bigger. And then I started automating the back end and all that kind of stuff. So, but I was pretty good at it. But I also found it rather boring. So usually I spent the morning coding for that company and maybe an hour after lunch, and then I would be so kind of done with it. And there was also back then MSN Messenger. Maybe you've heard of that. And my then girlfriend, now wife, was on that as well. So I spent a lot of afternoons sitting out the time texting with her on MSN. So that I did that for 2 years, and I decided I would not get old like this. So, and then it becomes a bit difficult because what do? You're pretty good at it, but I also felt out of place because most of the people around me at the desk, they were really happy, not saying anything all day. I'm not like that. So I don't know. I thought if this is going to be my life, I'm not happy with that. And during uni, I had like a very good first year with very high grades. So they asked me to be what is called in the Netherlands a student assistant. So you assist professors during their classes, especially classes where you actually work, do stuff like making calculations or code or whatever, to assist in that. And that was a very good match, actually. So I actually like doing it. But even more important, maybe, is that those students were only 1 or 2 years younger than I was. actually came to me instead of the professor because I could explain it better than he did. So that was kind of something because for the first time in my life, I felt a bit of a match. So after 2 years of going, after 2 years of software engineering, I decided to take a break with this friend I just mentioned, who I met on IRC. He was a little bit in the same situation, I think. I didn't know. We also graduated and didn't know what to do. So we said, well, why don't we go to China and think about it? Like that. We just typed it on IRC. I remember that. Let's go to China and think about this. He said, yeah, why not? So a couple of days later, we went to he took my passport to the Chinese embassy to get a visa, and a couple of months later, we went. So he went into research, and I said I want to go into education. So I applied to a position at what is called, um, yeah, it is called a hogeschool here. It sits a bit between vocational and academic. So you have it in Germany, you have it in the Netherlands and Belgium, but in the English-speaking world, it doesn't really exist. It was a good match for a couple of years. But the thing is, you're young, you're in your 20s, and I felt like most of my colleagues were like 30 years my senior. So I felt like I should have a little bit more experience. So I quit after a couple of years. And I went back into coding again, but I did some other stuff like Scrum and project management, um, like functional analysis, which should be the equivalent of like a product owner, you know. But I also did a lot of coding. But I was back again in this world with, yeah, boring people. I don't know. Uh,
Cubicles.
yeah, at cubicles. Yeah, yeah. So after 2 years, maybe a year, I did not do it for a long time. I went back to the uni and said, nah, it was not so bad here. Can I come back? So I did. Then my oldest daughter was born, and I was at the university. It was quite a drive, so there was a vacancy at one more nearby. So I switched, and I think I worked there from 2013 to 2020 or 2021. I quit during the COVID pandemic.
So, what was your experience when we all went remote?
When we all went remote.
Yeah.
Well, that was really one of the most horrific experiences of my life because for some reason, doing video communication, even like this, it really sucks out the life of me. It takes a lot of energy, and I think because my secret of being a good teacher or lecturer or trainer is the fact that I can make reports to the people I'm training or teaching. And I think all my senses are trying to get this information from the people, so that I can actually adjust to know how I interact. But when when doing trainings or when I lecturing from behind my computer, I couldn't do it. It was like talking to a black hole, and I need to know how my audience is receiving it. But I had like 40, 50, 60 black screens, muted cameras, whatever, on my screen. And I had to do that all day. And I became very unhappy again. Yeah.
Would it be fair if I say that you were not that satisfied already, and then this kind of hit the last nail into the coffin?
Yeah. So let's go a few years back. We had our university and our department. It was separated in teams, and there was this software engineering team which specialized in software engineering, and I became the team lead of that. That was a very interesting position because I had a lot of influence on the curriculum, and I have some very strong ideas about education and how it should be, because there's a lot of stuff going on that is not evidence based. So I like to take the most effective route. Um, yeah, so I was in a good place. But as a team lead, I was not a line manager, so I was a team lead, but we all reported to the same manager. So it was also a difficult position because if one of my colleagues would say no, I would have to convince them. And most interesting is that I created a semester. It's called Advanced Programming, where we really implemented DevOps, and I said, well, we can make 30 students work together building a software program because that's what they're going to do in real life as well. And they actually need to go use tools like Jira and Confluence to communicate. Because if you give them projects for like 2 or 3 people, you don't need to take all this scrum like procedure seriously. You can just say to each other what you're going to do, but if you're 30 of you, you have to communicate in a different way. Version control is different, so everything is different.
Daily
And
stand-ups.
daily stand-ups as well. So I implemented that, but I got a lot of pushback for that because many colleagues, they wanted to control, and you cannot control 30 students, so you have to have different learning aspects. So I had a couple of colleagues who wanted to do the experiment with it, and it was the year that WhatsApp was bought by Facebook. So we tried to create a messenger without meta information, with an onion Tor-like way of distributing the messages over a network. We actually won a innovation prize for that as well, and it almost became a startup. But the students, they had to go their own way and all that, so it didn't really work out. But I was really proud of that. And then shortly after disaster hit, I became ill. I had Lyme disease. I was bit by a tick, and it took me out for almost 3 years. I could work, but partially. But it took me 3 years to get completely over it. And then, I was no longer a team lead. I was no longer in charge of that specific semester. A lot of colleagues changed things in ways that I thought wasn't that great because they wanted to take back control in a way. I always work on the basis of trust, even to students. So in a way, I felt like, all the interesting things are gone. I have to maybe find another place to develop myself, to grow again, and to have a position of more influence. So because I was so successful with those teams, then COVID hit. Then I had to do everything online, and because it was a government institution, they had to be the example of the lockdowns. So most of my friends who were actually working in private companies, they could go to work maybe 1, maybe 2 days a week. I couldn't go at all. So it was just too much. And then my kids, I have 3 children. They couldn't go to school, so I had to work with 3 kids that I had to homeschool with my wife, who was still a little bit burned out because I was been ill for 3 years. So it wasn't an ideal situation. So it got kind of tense. But I said I need to. I became a bit depressed actually, working from home all the time. So I said I need to change that. So I joined Alliander. They were working on the energy, the new energy grid, and it has a lot of IT in it. So I started talking there, and I said, well, maybe and they wanted to implement agile working as well because they didn't do it that much. And I said, well, I can do that. So I started working there as a scrum master and agile coach. I think I did a good job, but I missed being technical. So the other guys were doing all the work, and I didn't, and that felt a little bit off, to be honest. And I desperately, because when all of Europe was starting to lift COVID restrictions in Netherlands, it became worse because I don't know why. That's another story. So they implemented a curfew. So I had to work all day from my attic, teaching students. Nobody liked it. Working from home, and then I had an 8 o'clock curfew in the night. So then, when I was finally done, doing stuff I didn't like, I couldn't go out. So things went crazy in my head. I cannot explain. So so it was an awful time, and I just wanted to get out of the Netherlands. So I started applying for international jobs because it was nowhere else in Europe. It was as crazy as with us at that winter. I was already working as an agile coach. So I applied at one security company who looked for trainers because I thought that I can do. And I always had privacy and security as a bit of a side hobby. I'm very interested in that. So I know my way around. So I applied for that in winter. And it took months for that specific company to come back to me. I'm not sure why that was. And I had to do a crazy online interview where I had to record a video. I don't know. There was all kinds of stuff that was kind of weird, but I pursued it anyway.
But then, as far as I know, something switched after you worked in that security company for a while, and you decided to do something crazy. And the funny thing, as our manager said, that is the best reason I ever heard to leave a company. Could you could you share your vision of?
So I was very happy with the team, with the manager. I wasn't so happy with the fact that COVID changed the world and there were more virtual trainings. So I wasn't quite happy when I had to do virtual trainings, but I got to travel. Like I mentioned, I was ill, but I had to deliver throughout Europe, and this gave me back my physical confidence. Because remember, I was ill for 3 years, then COVID happened, so I did not have a normal job during all this time. So being able to deliver in, I don't know, Copenhagen and other places throughout Europe, and being successful kind of gave me back the last few bits of confidence that I needed. But in the meantime, back home, my children, they are quite intelligent and they struggle with school, especially our youngest. He didn't want to go to school at all, and he started crying every day. He had to go, and I was doing business trips, and my wife got stuck with my son, and it wasn't easy. And my wife was still a little bit, I was ill. Then COVID happened. She had to homeschool, so she was kind of burnt out basically because of all of that. So things in my family, didn't go well. Not because we didn't like or love each other, but because we felt like we need to reinvest. And when it comes to habits, because when I was ill, I developed a new habit. I do nothing, you do everything, because I couldn't do anything. So, and when I was finally getting better, I still did nothing, and my wife did everything because that was the new habit. That was the new way of living, and we felt like we had to break that because, and it was very freaking difficult when you work. So that's why we decided to take a bold step. And I said to our manager back then, I said, "Well, I just want to invest in my family." And you have to remember, because I was ill all those years, I did not have a big savings account. So I said, we need to go travel, invest in ourselves. We have in the Netherlands like you cannot homeschool the kids. So you have to bring them to school. That wasn't working. So the only way is we could sell the house and we start traveling for a while. So we did that for almost a year. We traveled. So we kind of invested into the relations. I have 3 children, and that was really awesome. I think that was by far one of the best decisions I've ever made. I do not regret anything about it, even though we are now at the point that we have to resettle and find our way again. It was really the best decision I've ever made. We've grown so strong as a family, you can't believe it.
Once everything was said and done, you said, bye bye to the company, to the steady life. You and between and before you were gone into the unknown, was there a time period when you thought like, what have I done?
No, only when I came back. Not during. No, not at all. The scariest moment was calling our manager, telling her that I would leave. And I called her during our holiday when we decided that. So she said it's never a good thing when you call your manager during a holiday. I remember that.
You decided to go traveling.
Yeah.
Um, what was your plan?
We didn't really have a plan. We it was basically a means to get to know each other as a family again. And we bought a camper van, so that's 6 square meters. And when you live with 5 people and it's successful, you really do know you love each other. So we went to where the warm weather was, and it was a bad winter. So even in Portugal, it was cold. So we decided to travel to Thailand as well to get through the coldest months.
How many countries have you visited during this short trip? Let's name it like that.
Not so many. One, two, three, four, five or six countries maybe. Not so many, because it's really slow in a camper. You just basically drive somewhere, you put it there, you do whatever is going to be done there. Then you drive another 10 kilometers. You do the same thing at the next beach. Especially in Portugal, it's a bit like that. Also, it wasn't really a holiday because I had to homeschool the kids as well, which wasn't easy, especially in the beginning. But in the end, it felt like the most natural thing to do. So that's really funny, and I really started to feel like that we are actually living an unnatural state, as what we call our normal lives. It's more unnatural than being with your kids all the time. And I know I did not do a lot of work that paid in that sense. So that part might, you cannot keep it up like that, and I don't think that's normal. But the fact that you're with your family, you're investing, that you teach your own children, and all that kind of stuff, it felt so natural. Everything else now feels artificial. It's really weird.
Have you met any family that did the same thing, like any alike family like yours during that trip?
Not just one, many. There are like many families doing this. Some from the Netherlands, from Germany, from Latvia even. They're all over the place. You just don't see them. So you find them at the coast, Spain and Portugal mostly. And there are many, many, many families. Yeah, and some of that I would say were a bit like us. They just wanted to either take a break or they wanted to fix something or whatever. And we have some acquaintances now from that period. Others were a little bit more, I'd say, conspiracy minded, anti-system, anti-school, anti-everything. There were others like us who took it up very seriously, and yeah, we're not the only ones. I do feel like that most of them wanted to have like this gap year and have a lot of fun. I feel like when we returned, we were at the point most families leave. Like, let's have fun, and we were healed. We came from a bad situation, and we were in a good spot when we returned. It really, really changed us in a way that is very difficult to explain. It's really also inner change. I mean, we're in a society that only looks at what you do and what your results are, but your inner life doesn't, get a lot of attention in normal society, and we gave a lot of attention to that. So yeah, we've all changed for the good in a way, but it's a little bit more difficult to get back into what we call normal life, which I now consider abnormal.
Yeah, that's the hell of a trip to think about it. Um, if if you would do it again, what you would do differently?
The trip, you mean?
Yeah, the trip.
Nothing.
So you would buy a camper, pack your stuff, sell the things, and then just go away again with almost no planning, or you would somehow more plan the route, or I don't know, take a different camper?
I think the only mistake we made is that we returned too early. I think we should have stayed away longer. Because, like I said, like other families, they have this fun period traveling together, and we were just, you know, 6 months into the trip, my wife said, "Shall I drive?" I'm like, "What?" Yeah, I feel like I have this headspace to do it, like, and I was driving the camper van all the time. So when it became really fun, I have to admit, and this is my learning point, in a way, fear starts to kick in. Like, I was thinking, if I'm doing this for too long, who will still hire me? Will I become irrelevant? We sold our house for a very good price, but we have to buy a new one, so we cannot eat up all this money, spend all the money. So yeah, before summer we came back and we still went on holiday, and then after summer I started looking for jobs. Actually found one, which we're probably not going to talk about too much during this interview. I don't know,
You
but
just you just started there, so there's
yeah,
not yet anything to talk about.
exactly. Um, yeah, so but it's like I said, it feels a bit abnormal, not spending so much time with your family and your kids, where everything is loaded onto the weekends. So you have stress during your work days, and then so much needs to happen during the weekends to. And like last weekend, we were all had a bit of a stomach bug, so you don't have a weekend at all, and then Monday work begins again. It can be quite challenging, I think, and we all take this for granted, and it's being normal. But who really knows the children? Because you outsource them like 8 hours a day to a school, which tells them all the important things in life, in a way that you may agree or disagree. Like technology became very cheap. We all have an iPhone right now, but basics like living and eating and energy, they're crazily expensive. So yeah, there's a rat race going on, and somehow, for some reason, technology is not helping us. We should have more time on our hands, but we have less. Especially if you count that you spend 5 hours a day on average staring at this mini screen that's in your pocket all day.
Okay, so considering all that, considering your life experience, would you still go back and become a doctor? Would you take any different industry to succeed in career, or you still think that the tech was the good choice? Nothing's perfect. Nothing, it's but it should be good enough. Was it good enough?
If I were to advise my younger self on this, I would not advise tech, nor would I advise med school. The reason for tech is, and that's personal, is that I have this social side, social energy that needs to come out. And within tech, it's very difficult to find a good position for that. But I would not, um, no longer, because I've been through a lot of medical. I've been ill. I've had Lyme disease, so I've seen so many doctors. I've been to all this medical stuff. Also, my wife has a condition, so we're experienced. And the problem with doctors is that they don't, in general, I I find they don't think, but they follow protocol. So if you're not completely in that protocol, they're kind of lost. And at least in technology, people use deduction. They deduce. They find bugs. If your software is not working, you kind of start to pinpoint the problem. And in medicine, they pattern match. If there's no available pattern, they say we don't know, and they let you go. It happened to me. Instead of taking it seriously and start looking for what needs to be looked for. So because the med school is so hierarchical, I think I would not be a good fit because I'm way too autonomous for working in a system like that. So my challenge is, and that's why I don't know what I would advise my younger self, is to find a position where you can be more autonomous, because that's something. And I also rediscovered that during my travel, but also now in my new job, is that I have these crazy ideas, and if you let me go, they out of 10 times they work out, but I cannot do them because we don't do it this way, and that's a big frustration for me. So I cannot pinpoint what I would choose differently, but I would look into something different and maybe a bit more creative. Maybe if I had more guts, I would like to be a documentary maker or something like that. That's very interesting. Maybe I can still do it, or maybe start a podcast like you do. Who knows? What about you? I'm interested. Would you choose tech if it was your younger self?
That's the good question, right? And it's I think, to be honest, I think yes. Um, I think yes because it gave me it gave me much more than I've lost, right?
Big tech as well. You would work at Google, right,
No,
from 7 to 9,
no,
6 days a week.
no, no, probably no. I mean, it depends. If I would be like the first 5 or 10 employees at Google, then probably it would be worth that. But if you just sign a contract with Google and then do like 9 to 9, 7 days a week, that's probably not what I would like to. So I have a few questions. These are versus questions, A versus B. Yeah, and you just need to pick one. And from time to time, I can ask like, why? So let's
Right.
start with the first one: books versus movies.
That's already a very difficult one. I'd say books.
You'd say books. Fair, fair. Plane versus train.
Plain.
Speaking of books, paper book versus digital copy.
Okay. I would say right now the digital copy, because I have with when you have an e-reader. Otherwise, books, the paper ones, definitely. But with an e-reader, digital books become so much more convenient. It's like you're reading a paper book, to be honest.
Um, let's do it like that. Um, you do it fast, but get a mediocre result, or it takes longer time, but it would be a better quality.
This is one is unanswerable. Let's go for fast and mediocre because I like to be home early. I don't know.
Oh, I mean, mediocre is not bad, and it might be the good enough option, right?
What about fast and great quality?
Well, that's not the rules of the game.
No, I know.
Okay, and the last but not least, and again, we don't want to start any holy wars here, but Red Hat like or Debian like?
Debian. That one was easy. Yeah, that's because of APT.
Thank you so much for joining in. It was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure too. I really enjoyed it, and let's see what comes out of this. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.